It gives me great pleasure to welcome our three panelists and all the viewers who've been so timely to join our second DC Museum Talks. Why do stories matter to museums, and how can museums become better storytellers? For those of you who are maybe new to us, a short introduction to Dakshinachitra. We are Chennai-based, and the museum is now in its 26th year. A project of the Madras Craft Foundation, the museum's mission is the presentation and promotion of arts, crafts, architecture, language, music, and performing arts, particularly of South India, in order to create an awareness of the importance of cultural heritage in fostering an understanding of one's history and roots. So therefore, broadly, one definition of what our mandate is could be defined as cultural literacy. And to do this, we sort of go through a range of activities. We do programs, exhibitions, guided tours, workshops, talks et al., directed to school and college students, and in fact, all our visitors, actually. So one of the questions, therefore, we ask ourselves while designing each of these experiences is, what should they remember when they leave? So simply put, we come to the topic of our discussion today, because what they should remember when they leave is achieved only if we become better storytellers. Let me just introduce our panelists who actually represent quite diverse museums. Ruta Wakmare is from Bhau Dajilat Museum in Bombay, which was established in 1857, and quite interestingly, shares space with the Mumbai Zoo. Kritika is from the Indian Music Experiences Museum in Bangalore. This is very new, established in 2019. It chronicles the evolution of different streams of music in India. And finally, Aarti Tank is from the Maharaja Sawai Man Singh II Museum, a portion of which also serves as she just informed me a while ago, it serves as the home of the Jaipur royal family. It has a school, it has other spaces within its compound. I'll give a very short introduction of each of our speakers today before asking them to place their personal journey and some context of the institution that they can, add themselves. Ruta Wagmare did her master's in archaeology from Deccan College, Pune, before joining Bhau Dajilat Museum as an intern in 2013. Ruta is currently the curator for collections, education, and outreach. She also heads the museum's educational activities, including the docent and internship program. Kritika is a Carnatic vocalist and an engineering graduate. Kritika has had years of training and experience, both in performing and teaching music. Kritika has co-authored a book on musicians in Kannada and English, along with her mother, and has also conceptualized an encyclopedic series presented as an amalgamation of Kannada poetry and classical music. Kritika is the education manager at the Indian Music Experiences Museum and is a major force in the music education wing at the IME. Aarti Tank started a journey in the arts as a practicing visual artist and holds a BVA from the Faculty of Fine Arts at MSU Baroda. In 2015, she moved to London and proceeded to earn an MA in Fine and Decorative Arts from the Sotheby's Institute of Art, London, followed by a PG diploma in museum cultures from the University of London. Aarti currently works as a curator of the museum. So we actually all met at the museum educators meet at the CSMS in Mumbai, and which is how this idea germinated for this talk. So could I request each of you to give us an idea about your sort of personal journey and a little bit of the context of your museum? Would you like to start, Ruta?
Yes, thank you. So just to begin, a context to how I got interested in this field. I think as children, all of us have grown up listening to our grandparents tell us stories, mythologies, different kind of panchatantra kind of stories which have values or morals at the end. And she she was an avid reader, my grandmother. And through her stories, she was able to paint this very vivid imagination in my head. And eventually, sort of the understanding of historical narratives and everything blended together in my mind. This was also fueled by the fact that my family loved taking me to museums. And from a very young age, I was exposed to a variety of museums, and somehow I always felt like this was the space for me. I did not know what it was called. I did not know people could actually make careers out of it, because you don't see people in museums walking around. You just see objects. At least in my mind, in my childhood, all I could see was objects and stories about these lives and people who had changed things, who had created beautiful works of art. So when it came time in high school to sort of understand what I wanted to do further, when these questions start coming up because you're preparing for exams, I had a very nice history teacher in school who used to bring these stacks of National Geographic magazines to school to talk to us about whatever she was teaching. And there was a huge spread. And I think anybody who studied archaeology has been influenced by Egyptology, like this whole romantic idea of Egyptian history. And there was these double spreads of archaeologists working. There was some huge discovery. This was around 2003, 4. And that's when I decided that, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to study archaeology and I want to work in museums, without an idea of how one actually goes about it. But call it any kind of conviction. And I was lucky that my family took it seriously. Instead of saying, Ki, what will you do studying these streams? Nobody thankfully asked me that. And that's how it's just naturally I went to study archaeology. I dabbled in a lot kind of other kind of internships, advertising, publishing industries, before I went on to do a master's in archaeology, and started working at Bhavdajilar almost immediately after I graduated.
A little bit about the museum itself, if you can sort of contextualize that a little bit.
Museum is one of the oldest institutions in Mumbai. First museum, of course, and I use the word institution because there was literally nothing except the Asiatic Society and the Wilson College, which were two great education institutes. And Bhavdajilar Museum was established as the Victoria and Albert Museum back then. With this kind of a very deep history, colonial history at that. It was interesting when the museum reopened in 2008 after a very intensive restoration, which was spearheaded by the museum director. When it was reopened, the force was on education, on how to bring people in. And at that period, a whole new team was set up. And I came in on the team in 2013 as an assistant. And the force has always been to look at these objects through a very, very different light, rather than the standard labels or the ideas that have been handed down to us through generations. And that's how I began my journey with the Bhavdajilar Museum collections in 2013, and it still continues.
Thanks, Rucha. So, Kritika, would you like to share your journey?
Yeah. So my journey is very different from Ruta. So I have always been into music even since the time we knew what music was. So since a very young age, we started learning vocal, and sort of we have always stuck to that no matter what we studied. So it never came in the way of studies, because that's how we were brought up, and that's what we are even now telling the parents. So music is never a barrier, so please continue music for your children. So that's how we came up. We used to go to every concert. So I did my engineering then, and after that worked with an MNC as well. So but then I started teaching music since a very young age. So there was always this quest of, okay, there can be something else that can be done with music education than just teaching. So I couldn't find out what exactly was that extra that we could do, but it would need the support of many more people, not definitely doing it alone. So when this call for Indian Music Experience Museum came, and you can just understand my I could enthusiasm, thrill, and I was just thrilled to be into it. And I actually served under various roles before I took up education in a full-fledged manner. So I was into media curation because we are still a very young museum. So, and we are a very small team as well. So we kind of did multitasking, like a bit of curation, bit of media curation, handling special projects, curating special projects for various exhibitions, and then finally now each of us have our own areas to focus on, build that expertise, and now I take or I take care of the education part of it, both museum education to do that is to do with the schools, and music education where we have a learning center where we impart regular music classes in both Indian and Western art forms. So a little bit about IME's work is, as most of you would know, and Indian Music Experience Museum is India's first and only interactive music museum. So this is something special, and I feel very privileged to be a part of it, and I can say that again and again because there were many questions when I actually left my software job, like how can you match the salary while you're working in a museum? Frankly, at that point of time, I was not even bothered about the salary part of it. It was just that I get an opportunity to give back to my community, and this is something I can do with passion. It's not work stress for me, but it's something I'm passionate about, and every day is new and challenging for me. It's a creative day every day, so it's not routine work I'll have to look forward to. So that is the kind of work I would definitely want to follow every day. So IME works across various verticals like exhibition, conservation, audience development, education, and even community outreach. So we have been trying to overlap our work and work as a community, build a community for music, and that community is a mix of the layman, music, ones who can appreciate music and does not have to be a musician particularly. So we want to develop a community which can appreciate all kinds of music. So just because we are in South Bangalore, it does not have to be to do only with classical music. Even some you can even want to appreciate contemporary music, because Bangalore is a hub of so many different genres of music, and there is exposure to so many different kinds of music each day, and each area serves different music on a platter. So that is how we are trying to build a community around music itself. And definitely there are various public programs, and these public programs are definitely diverse, so to bring in all different kinds of people, and they get a platform at IME to meet, share the knowledge, and build up that expertise as well.
Thanks, Deepika. So the reason why sort of I asked each of you to also talk about your personal journey is because there's this whole sudden, sort of great interest in museums. A lot of private museums are coming up, and a lot of people listening in should sort of understand that there are many routes to reach, and there are many, and it's also the fact that museums are not static experiences. As you said, this each day is something very different. It's tremendously creative experience. Aarti, over to you.
All right, so my experience again is going to be a bit different. I come from a very typical quintessential Banya Marwadi business family. So the concept of creating a career in something cultural where there is no business to be made out of it was very alien to me. In fact, well, like my parents, I was privileged enough that I got to travel a lot, see a lot of the world, but museums were never a focus because nobody in my family is even near this industry. They're very creative people. My dad's a jeweler and they do all sorts of creative things, but never in this sort of a museum environment. Like when Ruta was talking about being taken there as a child, I was kind of envious because I never had that. So although my mother did encourage the bit of creativity I had in me, and she got me started very early in painting and drawing and crafts. I have learned every craft imaginable in this city of Jaipur. My mom has found someone and she has made me learn it. So that's why I was a visual artist. I was very happy painting, taking commissions, doing all of that, having no idea that this world existed out there, known as museums and all of that. And then, as luck would have it, I ended up at the Faculty of Fine Arts at MSU Baroda, where I was introduced to different avenues in art. Till then, my view of art was very linear. that's when I realized it's all branched out. Everything intersects. There are transferable skills all around. And as long as you want to do it, there is unlimited opportunity within the field beyond just your canvas or beyond your sketchbook. There is much more. And that's when every time we traveled, I started dragging my family to a museum with me, because I was like, if I'm going to go, you're going to go with me. And I faced a lot of, resistance in the beginning, that what is this? But then I said, okay, come with me. I will show you my way. And that sort of built into me over time an urge that I, at least in the community where I was, or the closest family or friends in my group, nobody was very inclined towards art and culture. And that's quite sad, being that I come from Jaipur, which is a very, very rich, culturally rich city, but that's the truth. And I sort of thought that I want to do something to correct that. I want to teach people how to connect with culture, with art, with history, with all of these things, but at a level which is acceptable to everyone. Not at a high academic level or, in a very technical way or any of it. My interest in museums and even wanting to learn this was basically so that I could understand enough of it so I could make my family understand it and love it, and sort of realize why I love this field so much, and why I'm like, even if I don't earn, it's fine. I'm just happy being here. So it was more so that I could do that. And then that grew. I was in India for a year doing different workshops and all of that. And then I ended up moving to UK, where first it was art authenticity and attribution, because again, business family, they thought this still makes some sense. Ultimately, ended up getting work ex in places like the VNA, and I got lucky to get an apprenticeship at the BM. And that sort of convinced them that, okay, there is some possibility. I ended up studying museum studies further and working there for a while. And then I came back to India. Back in India, I was all set to join MSMS Second Museum in March of 2020, and we all know how that turned out. So that got stalled for a good year, and then I joined in 21. I joined as an assistant curator, worked there for a year and a half, and quite recently, about 45 days ago, I made curator. So
congratulations.
It's a journey. I never thought I would be here, but yeah. Again, we're a very small team, a very niche museum. What our museum is so before the museum, let's understand the space. The museum is housed inside the City Palace of Jaipur. Jaipur is a relatively younger city when we talk about actual old cities in India, because 1727, it's not that long ago in terms of the grand scheme of Indian history. So when the palace was being built, everything in the city revolved around it. We had the karkhanas, the 36 karkhanas or departments which ran the city, which built the city, which planned to grow the city, all business activity, all trade, all religious activities, everything was rooted within the palace. And in like early 20th century, 1950s, the then Maharaja Savai Man Singh decided to open a part of his palace so that his public could see his collection. That was a time when Albert Hall, our sort of state museum, existed, but it was separated. He wanted to show his personal collection, whereas that was meant to be more of an arts and crafts museum, sort of an answer to the great exhibitions in the West and all of that. So he opened up what was called the Jaipur Museum. His son, who followed him, Savai Bhamani Singh, ended up renaming it in the memory of his father. And that museum then grew to form a trust. Now, that trust is what governs our museum and manages all our activities today. It is headed by the royal family because, like you had mentioned, the palace is still a living palace. It is the primary residence of the Jaipur Maharaja, and it is his personal collection or like his ancestral property that's on display. So that's why it's not planned as a grand museum with proper protocol set up and all of it. It's rather his personal space that he is sharing and opening up to the public. So that's always been the approach so far. Now, sorry. So the current scenario is, again, very small curatorial teams. I think that's the theme of this talk, that we come from very small curatorial teams. It's 3 of us, and we all do bits of everything. We do education, we do curation, we'll help out with conservation where needed, because, it's all hands on deck. But now with the new Maharaja or the new chairperson taking control of the museum and the board, things are moving towards a change where we are becoming more systematic. rules are being set into place. We are moving towards more of an international standard, whereas before that it was, as long as it happens, anything goes. So there is change happening, but it's still a relatively smaller and a very niche museum that deals with the private tastes of the family, Rajput customs and Rajput traditions, and the history of Jaipur itself. So it's not, the scope is not as broad as Bauji Dalal or the Indian music experience, but the depth of collection exists, and there's a large variety available. And the fact that the palace itself is still sort of crucial to many things happening within the city, which I'll talk about later, sort of means that we will never lose our value to Jaipur itself. Yeah. So that's why it's a fantastic place to work, because there's so much potential to, grow new things, to develop new ideas, and sort of try to modernize it while retaining all our cultural and traditional values. So it's challenging, yet it is super fun.
Thanks, Aarti. I think the introductory remarks are really sort of established very clearly that museums are exciting, fabulous places, and places that you come out of with a lot of conviction. And so it's obviously the storytelling part of it comes quite naturally, because you've sort of begun making the case for it within your personal space as yet. So the format would be that I think we'll go through some presentations with Ruta, Kritika, and you. And after your presentations, then we'll just have some questions that come out of what your presentations are. Ruta, would you like to begin your presentation?
Yes, I will. Let me just share my screen. So just quickly, this is the Bhaudajlad Museum exterior. This is located in Baikala, for those who are from Mumbai or have an understanding of Mumbai's geography. Baikala is this lovely neighborhood which was outside the main fort walls. The fort is the area still called a fort, where there actually army barrack existed. And by 1862, because Mumbai was expanding, there was no need to have fortifications to protect British interests anymore, since British controlled more or less large tracts of land in Western India. So Baikala was considered like the Malabar Hill, how Malabar Hill address would be considered today. It was very elite. We had the governor's house next door. We had the house of the richest man in Asia back then, David Sassoon, across the museum. So this was the address you wanted to be for a cultural institution. Of course, with plague in Bombay from 1896 to 1925, more or less, the area got quite ravaged. Those who could afford to move northwards in Mumbai, they moved, and Baikala was sort of forgotten. It is now seeing a resurgence with land estate levels rising, and central Mumbai, Lower Parel, which is quite next door, which was earlier the working class mill district, has now slowly becoming gentrified. So we see a shift in the kind of buildings, the kind of community that we see around. So it's a sort of mix of old and new. Like I said earlier, my journey actually began, this is me doing workshops as a student at the University of Mumbai. They had a fantastic program back then, which did diploma in archaeology. And all of us students from Deccan College were roped back to Bombay to talk about paleontology on the left and a mock trench on the right. And you could see me just gesturing wildly everywhere. So that's when I realized I really love public facing. I used to be extremely shy. Speaking like this would give me insane anxiety. But through storytelling of subjects that I love, eventually I managed to get over that. This is the interior. It's a stunning building. Again, extremely in a very neoclassical, built in a neoclassical style, meant to make an impact on visitors coming in. In fact, when the building opened in 1872, the Times carried a news article that it was quite a gaudy building. But people used to love coming here. Even today, it takes a while, if you're a first-time visitor to the museum, to realize there is actually display around, because people just whip out their phones and start photographing the interior. So the interior is as much of a USP of the museum like our collections. And you can see there are Corinthian columns. You see this entire cast iron structure. All the elements for the building were imported from England, which added quite a bit of cost to the building. And it took between 1862 to 1872 for the museum building to actually be built. So last year we celebrated 150 years of the museum building, which was quite sweet for us. And CSMBS celebrated 100 years. So two big heavy-duty Bombay institutions checked a milestone in our stories last year. In 2003 to 2005, the museum underwent never seen before kind of restoration revitalization through, I believe, one of its first public-private partnerships in any Indian museums. It was a partnership between the MCGM, the Municipal Corporation of Mumbai, which owns the museum building, along with Jamnalal Bajaj Foundation, who are our donor trustees, and Indian Trust for Arts and Cultural Heritage, or INTAC. At that point, the museum's managing trustee and director, Tasneem Mehta, was a vice chairman, and she headed multiple conservation projects in Mumbai. And the museum project was taken on. And once it finished in 2005, the building, it won the 2005 UNESCO Asia Pacific Heritage Award of Excellence, beating the Beijing Palace, I believe, that year, which was also a finalist along with the museum. This is one of the quotes I really loved. Now, Bhaudaji Lad, after whom the museum was renamed in 1975. It's quite a mouthful, the name. Not many people get it right at the first go. But he was the joint secretary of the museum, and he was quite a polymath. He was a doctor, but as generally the gentrified people back then went, they were a mix of everything. So he was the authority on also Indian scripts and Indology. So any king, Prince Edward, who used to visit India, they would call Bhaudaji Lad to take them on a tour of Mumbai. And he, in a speech in 1862 at the Darbar Hall in Asiatic, which was back then called the Town Hall, he mentioned that the museum is a book with broad pages and large print, which is seen at least, and by that mere inspection teaches somewhat, even if it cannot be read, which is such a poignant quote, because he meant the museum to be as a book. As you turn pages, you would understand different layers of history. So it really drives home the point that the museum is a story to be immersed in. You will not be able to read the whole book in one sitting. It's meant to be savored slowly and leisurely. The museum collection is what we call the jewel box collection. It's a mix of 19th century decorative arts, sculptures, also medals that you see in the center over here. It's a medal that was given to the museum in 1883 for representing samples of dried fish at the London Fisheries Exhibition. The museum played an important role in the trade history of the erstwhile Bombay Presidency, by which I mean that the museum was the sole representation of the arts and crafts of the presidency on an international level. So it played a very huge part in developing taste and developing the projection of Bombay as a cultural capital to the world abroad. We also have some amazing collection of Mumbai city maps in our records, which is why it is now considered as a Mumbai City Museum. We have clay models, dioramas depicting the lifestyle of people of Mumbai. So it is literally a people's museum. These models were created in the 1900s, and during our tours in the museum, we go in depth and take an in-depth look at why these models were created, who created them, what was the intention, what was the educational purpose, and how do we circle it back to make it relevant today. We have beautiful dioramas. This is a life-size kind of diorama of Jahangir on Shikar. It is inspired by a 16th century Mughal painting, which is today in the Indian Museum in Kolkata. So the artists were actually influenced by a lot of prints, imagery that was coming through the printing presses in and around Mumbai at this time, and creating these lovely dioramas for public consumption in the museum. It continues to be the most popular section of the museum. We take all these collections, a very diverse, small collection, and we try to tease the layers of history, the layers of narratives it can tell us. Recently, a few years ago, we did an amazing tour called Hidden Histories of Museum, looking at objects that would make you ask, why is this in this museum? So that question we used to get constantly during our free public tours on weekends, and we took those questions and shortlisted about 10 such objects in the museum where we wanted to talk about the hidden histories. And it was a fantastic tour and we got a huge response. Along with that, we do multiple storytelling workshops with children, with adults. One such regular offering used to be weaving tales at the museum, where we looked again at the layers of history in the collection to write different stories. Another storytelling aspect of the museum is through contemporary art. Now, when the museum reopened in 2008, there was a huge force into engaging with what is happening in Mumbai today. It was not enough to tell the story of Mumbai in 19th century through our 19th century collection, but it was important to also sort of give platform to contemporary artists to engage with the collection. Because as we know, in older Indian museums, we have all these beautiful objects, but there is hardly a note saying who made it. When it was acquired by British curators, till 1930s, the museum had British curators. And there was hardly any mention of who were the artists, who were the ateliers, where did all this come from, apart from a brief note of just regional descriptions. So when the museum reopened, the director came up with this program called Engaging Traditions, where artists were now invited to have an open dialogue with the collection, to pass a commentary on it, have a tongue-in-cheek opinion. And Ellen Talur, who is one of India's foremost artists, actually took this case of this beautiful stone elephant, a 6th century stone elephant, which rests outside the museum gate. It was brought from Elephanta because the Elephanta caves, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Mumbai. This elephant the stone elephant used to stand outside the Elephanta caves. That would be the first thing people would see when they came to the island. And in the olden days, the first wave of Portuguese army that came in, they wanted to practice the shooting skills. So they used to practice it at Elephanta, damaging a lot of our beautiful sculptures inside. Then eventually, when the British rule consolidated in Mumbai, they wanted to take the stone elephant out to England, and they managed to pick it up, but whatever contraption they were using was obviously not up to the mark. The elephant broke into multiple pieces, and the then curator, George Birdwood, brought the pieces to the museum, and it was finally reassembled in 1914 and showcased. And Ellen Talur took this story to create this wooden elephant, which is also 4 ton, and you can reassemble the wooden pieces and you can break it down, thereby not only in the obvious metaphor of reconstructing history, but also giving it your own meaning. And this 4-ton elephant was quite a production to bring on the first floor of the museum, because the museum is such an old building. We are not allowed to use machinery. Everything that installations that happen have to be done manually. So it was quite a feat of engineering to get these pieces up. And today it is in the permanent collection of the Bhavdajilat Museum. So this also kind of began an acquisition program, because very few Indian museums actually acquire contemporary art to showcase this epoch of Indian history. So Bhavdajilat Museum started that in 2008 when they reopened. And a contemporary art program actually also gives multiple narratives. The artists have a lot of conversations with us, not only the curatorial team, but also the gallery attendants, to understand our reading of the museum and take all this information and create artworks in collaboration with the director's curatorial inputs. And these results over since 2008 that we have been open, we have done over 85 exhibitions, which is a huge number for a small museum like Bhavdajilat. And one of the biggest projects we did recently was publishing this book, Mumbai, A City Through Objects, because through these years, all the research we've been doing, the director had the idea of why not put it like inspired by Neil MacGregor's History of the World in 100 Objects. We thought we'll put History of Museum in 101 objects, because in India, 101 is an auspicious number. And this was a fantastic project we worked on since many years in the making, but with full focus from 2020 to 2022, when it was published by HarperCollins. And it got a fantastic response from scholars across the world, and even general public, who actually wrote us a note saying it felt like you were holding the museum in your hands. So this was one of the best projects I've worked on, I think, in the last 10 years at the museum. just to give a glimpse of how the book looks from inside, with over 300 fully beautifully illustrated photographs. Now, just to give like a quick brief of why museums love telling stories. If I take the case of this silver fruit stand in the museum, you would look at it and the basic description would be it's a 19th century silver fruit stand. It comes from Chennai. In the older labels, of course, it says Madras, and it was acquired by the museum in early 20th century, and it is created in a repoussé hammering technique. This is okay for scholars who understand what each of these words mean. But for a general public, it's not enough. It's not going to retain your interest. So if I tell you that look at the object very closely, on top you see these petal-like formations with Gandharvas inside. At the bottom, you see three birds. The third bird is hidden from view over here. If I tell you it's actually an amalgamation of different styles of silver working that was popular in India, it immediately catches your creative mind first. If I tell you that these birds are actually, though the object is made in Chennai, the birds are not seen in Chennai. These are migrated birds that you see only in Rann of Kutch, which gives you maybe another hint that the artist has probably migrated from Kutch. Because in 19th century, with developing markets, artist migration was quite common, especially with the fall of royal patronage eventually as British controlled territorial areas of the Indian subcontinent. Artisans began migrating. So this is an interesting example of that fact. Then why fruit stands were popular. Of course, in Harappan evidence, you see fruit on stand, dish on stand, kind of a fruit stand, kind of an object. But in 19th century, particularly in England, there was a huge change in how people used to have dinner, where earlier they would keep all food on table together to show also a status, wealth of the household. Eventually, with wars and territorial expansions and all the wars the empire was fighting abroad, it became important to have rations, rationalize your food output on your dinner table. And there were lots of magazines, women's magazines in the 19th century that said that, oh, if you get a fruit stand and you artfully arrange fruit on it, and so it gives a centerpiece on the table looks full, artfully done, and it stays full. And why am I talking about British dinner service? Because the object would be made to be bought in England or by the elite in Bombay, which were eventually copying the richer, the ruling sort of elite in India. And it happens through generations. Every time there is a certain preference of the ruling class, eventually it has a trickle-down effect and people want to imitate it so that they are considered equal in status and equal in culture. So eventually it was such things were also bought by Indian elites. But the minute I tell you these stories, it makes the object so much more interesting. Then we do sample digital storytelling through even digital formats, not just public tours. We have playlists to interpret our collections. The minute the lockdown hit in Mumbai, we did a fun exercise where we said, we'll take you through Mumbai because people can't go up and down. And for somebody from any part of the world, if especially your city used to taking your local trains every day, it was unthinkable for a Mumbaiker to not be able to take local train. So we said, okay, we'll take you around Mumbai. And we used our maps to tell different stories. How do these certain old names that you see on maps, how did they come about? And it was a huge hit. I think this was second weekend of the lockdown when we all thought that it was going to last just a month. So we had all kinds of enthusiasm to do these things. And then, of course, a playlist on Spotify, which we still have, and we have new ones in the working. To treasure hunts. How do you use Google Arts and Culture, where we have spent so much time and effort putting our objects online? We did treasure hunt. All of us became poets. We put on our thinking caps, and our team turned into writers and poets overnight to write these small stanzas. And we zoomed into objects, and people can go through a virtual walkthrough on Google Arts and find objects. And we actually gave them gifts when the museum could reopen. People got different shop products in their mail, which they absolutely loved. And it was a way to keep connected with the museum. Recently, on 18th, we launched our first digital pocket gallery. Very few museums in the world right now are on this thing called Pocket Gallery by Google, which is a new offering. And we have a beautiful exhibition called a Hall of Wonder, where you see some objects which are not on public view, which can't be on public view due to certain restrictions and because they are fragile. But in this 3D gallery, you can see all of it together in a way, tells you the story of the early intentions of the museum. And for those who wish, they can scan this QR code and look at the 3D gallery. So yeah, that's our channels. That's a bit in a sort of in a capsule. Why, how that how do we forefront stories through our diverse programming? You're on mute.
Yeah. So that was fabulous. And the way you responded to the lockdown, I think it just, one had all kinds of creative ways for storytelling during that time. And you've also gone into, into technology in a very interesting way. So the next, Kritika, would you like to share your PowerPoint?
So this is the front facade of the Indian Music Experience Museum, which is located in JP Nagar, South Bangalore. So IME is a non-profit initiative of which is supported by the Brigade Group. And so the vision of the museum is to introduce the youth to the diversity of Indian music and also to preserve India's rich heritage. And there's something for everyone in the museum, something from traditional to contemporary for the young and the old alike. So everybody has something they can listen to, they can appreciate, go back, get nostalgic about. And yeah, so the IME also comprises high-tech multimedia exhibit galleries, and there's a sound garden and a learning center for music education, and there are several performance spaces. So this is just a quick view of the instruments gallery, one of our highlights of the museum, where we have more than 110 to 120 Indian playable instruments. They are all in a playing condition. So Indian classical and folk instruments are there. Some are donated by legendary musicians of our country that I've seen, and some are acquired through from various parts of the country. And see there that we have 9 thematic galleries, and every gallery has a story to tell in a capsule format. So you might not find it deep diving there, but you are introduced to various facts about each of the genres of music that you would see, from contemporary to folk to Indian classical, and just instrumental, and then Bollywood or different movie songs, and a little bit of history about each of them. So this is our sound garden, which is on the exterior, which has 10 playable installations that are primarily based on the concepts of physics that one would learn in school. So while we were studying physics, it would always be just mugging up the definitions of frequency, amplitude. Even to this day, it's still a huge confusion. What is frequency? What is the inversely proportional and all that? So, but here we try and make it a practical approach to experience that frequency, amplitude, vibration through these sound garden installations, which are made of natural materials. And there's a sound table where how the quality of a material influences the kind of sound that would be produced. So these are a big takeaway for students, and they can try their hands on and experience them firsthand itself. So this is our learning center, where we have more than 200 students learning different kinds of art forms, Indian and Western. And this is our, we facilitate school, educational school field trips, where the students are taken on a guided tour by a volunteering community, which is a very strong and vibrant community. So we have made them take them through the museum as a story, tell them a story, and it's not a fact-based tour. So they take them on an age-appropriate tour, tell them different stories, how Purandaradasa, why did he become a saint from a wealthy merchant, so that itself is a story in the Carnatic section. And then when they go to a section called Melting Pot, where our culture is an amalgamation or a melting pot of various cultures, and how we are influenced by some of them, and the West is influenced by the traditions of Indian music and culture. So there are various interesting stories that one can say in each tour. So each tour is a different experience for the same volunteer here. So they definitely look forward to each tour, working with the different age groups of children. And as you can see, he's our youngest volunteer of probably 70 plus, and they have been with us through many years, and they've been helping us and a strong pillar of support to IME as well. And these are the different public spaces that we have, and this beautiful gramophone that you see here, that itself is a section where we speak about the history of recording, how from wax cylinder to the digital era, how we have evolved, how women played an important role in the recording history of Indian music. And when men didn't want to even participate in the recording trials with the gramophone, it was the Devadasis and the women who came in because they had nothing to lose, and they were pioneers in setting up this, and they just tried out their beautiful voices, which was just stuck to 3 minutes. And I could just probably name one of them, Gauhar Chan. I think many of you would have heard about her. So she was a pioneer in the recording expedition. And there are various stories for each and every artifact. So while we see that BDL had a lot of artifacts to speak about, at IME it's an interactive music museum, so you'll have to engage with music in different formats. So you have probably less of artifacts, but there are a lot of interactive, gamified approach to learning the concepts of music itself. Just for example, if you want to learn about the 3 pillars of music, that is a Shruti, Raga, Tala, pitch, melody, rhythm. How do you learn about that? So it is through these interactives where you try out, you sing, and you know, okay, are you in pitch, are you not in pitch? So, and then it's all through these interactive exhibits that we have tried educating the visitor without actually telling them that you're learning something when you're in the museum. So, and these are our very broadly categorized areas of activity where we have community outreach. So during the last 2 years, we've been dealing with the Project Swarita, which is our flagship program of community outreach, where we get in students from the socially disadvantaged background and neurodivergent children. They get to visit the museum, appreciate and take back something which probably they wouldn't have had an opportunity otherwise. So this is very close to our hearts because we have seen the impact of music, especially on the neurodivergent children who are on the autism spectrum, how they react to music, how they appreciate music, and how passionate they are even to learn something new. So every time they come, there's a small song that they would be taught as part of the project itself, and they go back with so much enthusiasm in whatever capacity they can. And the feedback that we get from their parents is something that touches our heart, definitely. And through education, we have been trying to do various initiatives to take music to schools, and how music can be an important part of their curriculum and not just a hobby that you do when you're free and when you want to like to do something. So it has to be part of one's growing up years, because we have seen that it definitely has a very important role to shape an individual's personality. So music is not just listening to the 7 notes, it has a greater impact. So it's a very creative space for me as well. And through public programs, we are trying to reach out to diverse audience groups. And conservation, definitely there's a lot that we have and that people are willing to give from their collections as well. So we're trying to put them together and take care of them. And definitely through our exhibits, we have been curating the traveling exhibition. So 2020, the great year of the pandemic, we actually started with the Ravi Shankar Centennial exhibition. We just opened the exhibition and we hit the pandemic, but it was a virtual exhibition, and then it traveled to various museums in the country. And then last year we had the bird song exhibition, where which drew a lot of students to the museum because they were very interested in about how can birds and music be related. Yes, they can definitely be related, which was the whole point of our exhibition, where birds have an influence on our music, how our music has been shaped just due to the bird calls, and that is a very interesting concept to even study. And we had various public programs and school initiatives around this theme itself. So our structure of the museum would be the sound garden, and we have the 9 exhibit galleries, and then the learning center, which is about imparting music education. So these are some of the glimpses of our presentations that we have done. And yes, we look forward to students coming in every time and appreciate what we have right at the heart of the city, and you don't have to travel far to find something related to music and then come back here. So try and appreciate whatever you have, and please do visit when you're in the city.
Thank you very much, Ritika. Aarti, over to you now. And then we'll have the round of questions after that.
I hope the view of this is fine.
Yes, it's fine now.
All right. So, like I said in the introduction, City Palace Jaipur is a living palace. In terms of things to see, there are 2 categories that are very clearly defined. There is the museum, which is the Maharaja Savai Man Singh Second Museum. And then there is a royal private tour of the palace where the family resides. Now, even in the museum, there is a lot of diversity in terms of objects that are on display and things to see. There are 5 galleries which focus on various different collections. We have a fantastic collection of arms and armor because, well, Rajput warriors, that has to be there. We have wonderful textiles. Like in the gallery, you go through stories of what the Maharanis wore for different occasions and different festivals, and how that correlated with the turbans that the Maharajas would wear, and so on and so forth. There is an extensive collection of paintings and photographs. There is carpets. There are also also royal transports, which is all the way from bullock carts and ruts going to Victorian buggies. And then there is the Royal Sabha Nivas or Darbar Hall. So in this presentation, I don't want to talk much more about the galleries. Rather, I want to talk about stories that we have outside of the galleries, because, well, it's a very small museum and I would love if all of you would come and visit us. But what people often don't realize is that City Palace Jaipur actually does most of its storytelling outside of the galleries, and most of it in the way we interact with the city and our visitors, using either the craftsmen and the artisans that we house, or just the customs and sort of rituals that we are still keeping alive. So by living heritage, we mean that we still follow a lot of traditions that were established in the Jaipur court. When the capital shifted from Amer to Jaipur, they brought along a lot of their own customs, and they also adopted a lot of it as the city grew. In terms of sort of rituals and larger celebrations, they have more to do with the public in Jaipur itself. We have large-scale events that happen which involve the public, the city, the cultural history, and the objects. Like, for example, the picture here is from our Gangor Yatra. So we take out a massive yatra for Gangor and for Tej. And the Devi, you see that silver palanquin that she's sitting in. It's a solid silver Takhte Rawa, which is the pride of our transport collection, which comes out twice a year for the public on the streets of Jaipur. So that's a tradition that's been going on since the day the city was established, and we still carry it forward. Similarly, in the previous slide, I'm sorry, I'm going back. So this is not actually as violent as it appears. For Holi, I think a lot of us have seen Holika. In Jaipur, the custom was that the first Holika of the year would be lit by the Maharaja himself, because it comes from the royal household. And then all of these boys take that fire from the pyre and they run all around the city, and and the same flame then lights the next holika and the one after it and the one after it. Because back then the tradition was that the flame from the holika was kept in your homes for the whole year. So the flame coming from your Maharaja, who's considered to be, the whole and soul of your kingdom, is meant to be more sacred and to have more value. So there are many such traditions, from the Shera Puja to Holika, Gangor, Tej. We have things happening for every single major festival around. But other than these larger ones, which do more for the city of Jaipur and its residents or local Rajasthani population, there are also many small day-to-day activities that happen, which are meant to introduce elements of the royal court to the visitor who might be here for the first time, or who might be here for a very short period, or who's revisiting, to sort of recollect what happened with them. It could be something as simple as a puppet show which tells the stories of Rajput kings and queens. It could be something like, for example, we have Shehnai that plays every day from 12 to 12:30 to denote the presence of our Maharaja. And things like that, which happen more on a day-to-day basis. And they're meant to cater more, like, sort of not cater, but rather tell the public about life in the royal court and how the various customs got adopted into it. So, for example, in this picture here, the one on the left, it happened on the birth anniversary of Guru Nanak Dev, wherein one of our Maharajas was gifted his sword by one of his sons, and we created a mock display, and then we invited people from a local Gurudwara to come and sing Gurbani for us, and to hold that small 2-hour session for our visitors. Similarly, so the upper photograph on the right is all of our gates. We have massive, beautiful gates all around, and all of them have some form of Ganesh at the top. And on Ganesh Chaturthi, there are pandits who are tasked with climbing all the way up there and worshipping them for the year and all of it. The musicians that you see in the right corner are actually from Sakrat, wherein we open the palace up for free, and we give kites and chai pakoda and tilka laddus and all to all of our guests and visitors to just come and experience Sakrat in the walled city, because it's a sight to behold. And as an accompaniment to it, we have traditional musicians singing traditional songs, which are very rare, and which very few people actually know the wordings to anymore, because most of it is in Dhundari or Marwadi and all of these local dialects. The other part of storytelling and that means a lot to us as a historic palace is the people who have made it what it is. Since its inception, City Palace has been a center for patronage for art and culture, and it still continues. A lot of the crafts and practices that were initiated there, we've tried to keep as many of them alive as we can. Much has changed with time, but we still offer spaces to craftsmen and artisans who want to practice their craft, and we offer them a platform for it. Now, the reason for it is not just to preserve history, but also because as a historic palace, we rely on them. We cannot sustain the palace without the presence of these extremely skilled individuals. We cannot maintain our collections without it. Now, a lot of these people are actually the ones who have been attached to the palace for generations. In certain cases, going back 5-6 generations, have been working within the palace, learning these crafts, honing it over time, and adapting it to the modern era. Now, these sort of craftsmen and artisans come in various forms. You would have, for example, we have a carpet weaver whose family has its traces all the way back in Iran, whose parents forefathers came and settled in Delhi and then moved to Jaipur when the Mughal court was sort of dismantled. And he still works for us, repairing our older 17th and 18th century carpets, where he hand dyes every single thread and picks and refills threads and patches things up by drawing the tana bana together and all of it. On the lower right, what you're seeing is a siklikar. Siklikar is a traditional name for a person who makes and maintains and cleans weapons. And their tools and techniques are very different from what is acceptable in today's conservation aware world. Now, there are weapons that we use for, there are weapons we conserve following all the international conservation guidelines, but then there are large amounts of weapons in our collections that rely on the work of these Siklikars who are trained in these traditional cleaning techniques using traditional local materials as opposed to conservation grade chemicals. And they are in a large part responsible for the way our collection still survives, and the fact that our swords are still perfectly functional and none of our spears are falling apart and all of it. On the top right is a glimpse from our Friends of the Museum. Friends of the Museum is a dedicated space we have, which is for the craftsmen and artisans, wherein you can get a space, practice your craft, sell it, or even just publicize it. It is a way to give them a platform and to guarantee them an audience in the form of visitors coming to our museum. Many of them, like for example, miniature painters, might be looking at our collection and creating replicas of it, or works-based works that are inspired by it. But then they have also now started modernizing and creating contemporary versions of those works, which we not only encourage, but we also promote. So for example, in the photograph here in the top right, that is a Tarkashi, which is the inlay of metal wires. Now, if you visit City Palace, you'll see that they have lots of traditional, very classic looking pieces, but then they also do custom pieces. Like, for example, in this particular photograph, he is actually working to engrave and inlay car tags for all the cars in the City Palace. So that's what I mean, that we try to encourage them even with tasks that we require for day-to-day use, and that. Now, for us, as sort of what we call ourselves as guardians of history and legacy and tradition. And for us, it's very important to always think of the future and not just of the present. There are a couple of factors that we need to consider when we talk about future work. Now, Jaipur as a city, although not very old, it has still evolved rapidly in sort of bursts of growth under each new reign. And those changes were quite massive. Right? Like, for example, in this photograph here, you can see that the front part is this sort of lemon yellowish with bluish white lime plaster lines as decoration, which was done in the era of Man Singh, which is 20th century and still part of our history. But if you look further down, you will see what we restored into an even older style dating back to the early 19th century, wherein you had Khamira on walls with these beautiful highlight lines in what looks like sort of brown, but it's actually maroon and green, which gives it that mixed color. Now, for us, it's a constant debate in terms of whether we want, like, how far we want to restore our history and what story we want to tell the public today. So, for example, everyone knows Jaipur as the pink city, but Jaipur was not meant to be pink from its very beginning. It was Savai Ram Singh II who decided to paint the city pink to welcome the British king. And that's how that's how we got our name and our identity. Now, there are days when we want to play on that, but then there are also days where we want to go back further and talk about stories of Maharajas before that, or how Jaipur was before it was given this uniform identity. So going forward, we are very conscious that we have to have opportunities for parallel narratives, and many of them all together, in order to do justice to the story of Jaipur itself. Now, a big struggle in anything we plan for the future is that a lot of our craftsmen or our skilled labor is actually declining. We do not find workers as readily as we used to. We cannot find the quality of craftsmanship that we require to maintain the place. And that's something that we are the most conscious of right now, and something we are genuinely trying to combat, in the sense that we now offer free training workshops and long-term sort of training sessions to anyone who's willing to learn in things like Chuna Jali and Araish and all of it, with a guarantee of employment after they complete the training. Because we know we will always require these workers, and we are willing to nourish them and sort of nurture them and, pay for it, as long as it can guarantee that the craft passes forward to the next generation. It's done in many ways. Like, for example, the lower right is the original tools used to carve chuna jalis. And these workshops were meant for laborers, but they weren't restricted to it. The curators, all of us attended these workshops, and we learned how to make the mix for what the proportion of the mix is, and how you're supposed to carve, and how long you wait before it's ready to be lifted, and all of that, because it's meant to be part of our palace history and something that we should all be aware of. On the left is a person painting on rice. Now, it's a very rare thing, and very, very few people do it nowadays, but there are plenty of such craftsmen housed within the palace. And we have an annual summer camp every year where they will come out and teach their crafts. Not all of them are actually practically, it's not practical for us to teach every one of them every year, but there is a good mix of them and a good rotation that happens. On the top right, you'll see these musicians in their bright orange turbans, and that's actually the chung players for Holi. So like a week prior to it, there used to be these traditional rural musicians that used to come to the palace to sing chung for the Maharaja, because it's meant to be good luck and sort of meant to be the start of the Holi celebration. And what we found in recent years is it is getting to be nearly impossible to get them to come from those villages, because nobody wants to do it anymore, and nobody in our cities actually knows the words or the beat for these songs or any of it. And what we have now started doing is we encourage our younger gallery attendants and docents to take the time and learn and play with these older musicians while they're still around, because we figured out that just writing and documenting these songs wasn't enough. We needed to be able to teach them how to perform it, because these musicians actually have the ability to get every single visitor up and dancing outside of galleries in our courtyards when they get into the beat of it and all of it. So yeah, that's something that we are very conscious of and something we rely on a lot. And our primary focus going forward is to find ways to get all of these craftsmen together, to nurture them, to train future generations, and to find ways to safeguard our history and our traditions. So yeah.
Thank you, Aarti. So that was absolutely fascinating. The presentations were just so diverse and interesting, and obviously the storytelling is in terms of content, style, technique, or platform, from straightforward walkarounds to interactive learning, to even what you brought out, Aarti, that is the reasons why. For one of the reasons, of course, is to get our visitors engaged and therefore enriched by the time they leave. Like we started, what do they take with them? But also having other stakeholders for whom it becomes very important to create that excitement and storytelling, so that a particular craft might survive, a particular way of performing, could survive. So all that. So I'm going to come, we've sort of now, it's been an hour, so I'm just going to come down to one critical question that I think we should also ask. It's actually two-in-one question. One is, I know that IME is relatively new, but in whatever way, what are the changes in audience expectations, and how does one constantly keep tab of that? As audiences, come, there's a maturity that also develops and their expectations change. And the second part of my question is, how do we bring in criticality? That is, we say a particular story about an object or a museum or a period for some time. How do we, integrate the idea of reviewing the stories that we say with more and more diversity and inclusion? I think also because increasingly museums have come to understand that within their storytelling, their community has to see a relevance in. The community needs to see themselves in the stories, and the community needs to see a relevance in the kind of stories that the museum engages in. So you have the student, whether the school or college, and in fact, one of them said, as much as the student, you also have to get the parents engaged. So there's all these multiple things. So basically mine is a two-in-one question. One is the shorter portion would be probably changes in audience expectations. Any quick examples of how we've accommodated that? And the other is the aspect of bringing criticality. That is, reviewing the stories that we say so that there's more inclusion and diversity. So maybe we could start with you, Aarti, and then work our way backwards.
So audience expectations are changing very, very rapidly. And because we see a more so our audiences are also changing very rapidly. So pre-COVID, City Palace our sort of almost 60% of our audience was international tourists. I mean, that was the clientele we were catering to. So for them, anything to do with Indian history, even the smallest of detail, is fascinating enough to capture their attention. And then we have, so our palace complex was built in stages, like I was talking about. So there are plenty of different architectural styles to keep them occupied, even if the galleries aren't that developed. Now, post-COVID, the biggest change for us has been that our audience has shifted 90% to domestic. So that was a major shift because we had to shift the way we were telling the stories. Our guides had to be retrained to adapt to a more domestic audience because they would know a lot of the epics or the mythological tales we're talking about, or a lot of the festival celebrations and all, which might be fascinating to a foreigner. It does nothing for a domestic visitor. So we had to adapt and change the way we were showing them the spaces, showing them the museums. And a lot of it, I think, is now boiling down to what I feel Ruta and Bajidulal are doing very well, which is integrating technology all together, being a presence on sort of Google Arts and Culture, or doing these online snippets and tours, because we feel that at least with the younger audiences, we connect better when we use such tools. However, personally, like for us, it's more about getting a more widespread change happening. Like right now, after 23 years, galleries are being recurated and revamped, which is a big thing for us, because it might not be for a museum which changes things very quickly and rapidly. But like we were talking about, Glacier Speeds, 23 years to recurate a gallery. That's what we have. So now that we have that opportunity, we are being conscious of it. And say, for example, we are currently working on our transport gallery. So we built a ramp inside so that the visitor, as they go up, they're seeing objects at the height at which they would have been when the palanquins were either carried or the elephant was wearing the armor and things like that. Sort of, we cannot get all the tech and all of that in because of budget constraints, but we figured out we can do these small quirks to our curation or our gallery design or the way in which we are exhibiting objects. And that brings in a bit of sort of the spark that our now domestic audiences require, because they are no longer happy with static displays. So I think that's what we have been doing as a museum. I'm sure there's a lot more that can be done, but currently that was at the forefront of the work we are doing.
Okay. And what about you, Kritika, in terms of sort of first audience expectations and also working on diversity and inclusion in the storytelling?
Yeah. So audience expectation, yes, definitely. When we speak about music, it's usually understood that they cater to all different kinds of music that's available on earth. So which might not be the case now, but we'll ultimately get to. But yeah, just a small example of how we have approached the museum. So once we enter the museum, one would probably, due to our naming convention, Indian Music Experience Museum, you would think that the first gallery that you would enter into would be the classical section. But on the contrary, it's a contemporary section, because we would like to bring in the youth to step into the museum first.
Smart, because you get the children into this contemporary space, and then you bring them into the classical. I think that's also a fabulous way to.
So first we go your way, and then we take you our way. So that's the very idea behind that. Yes, when you give them what they like, they are very willing to take in what we want to give them. So that we have seen that practically. So when we speak about contemporary music, some familiar names that children would know, then immediately it sparks interest in them, and they are willing to go further to the other exhibit galleries. On the contrary, if something puts them off just in the beginning, we see that resistance. So that audience engagement survey is a very important aspect for us, especially when it comes to music, because every individual has a different taste, has a personal taste in music, and you might not be able to cater to everyone's taste, but at least we can get the generic idea, okay, this works well for this age group, that we can possibly do, and that is how we have tried curating. Yes, so the curation team has to continuously work on this, be up to date with the kind of topics that they have to look for, and what interests a particular section of people, and what is relevant, how do you make it relevant through stories. That's a very important aspect of our storytelling approach in the museum itself. And definitely incorporating technology has helped it by gamifying the very simple basic concepts, because once we start telling them, okay, Shruti, this is the foundational aspect, the raga, this is the melody, no child would listen to you. While you make them play, so we have a hybrid sounds interactive where they can just mix and match different kinds of musical instrument sounds, Indian and Western, and they create their own mix. So that itself is an eye opener. Oh, there are so many varieties of instruments, there are so many genres of music to start with. So that appreciation, that eye opener is something we look forward to when somebody enters music and they go back with that knowledge. Or even just when they enter the instruments gallery, just knowing that there are 4 different categories of instruments to start with: wind, then string, then percussion, then solid. These are the basic categories. They might have seen an instrument, but they wouldn't probably know that there are different categories of instrument that have been followed since the 2nd century BC itself. So these concepts, how best we can put it across to our audience is definitely a challenge, and we have to keep evolving every single day, be it respect to our Google Arts and Culture online exhibits, or even how we design the panel, how we design the exhibit, what kind of a service provider we go with. So everything is under scrutiny. So it's definitely a challenging one, but you get introduced to so many different aspects and you learn so much in the process. So you start appreciating more what we have, and probably you wouldn't have given it a thought if you are just a visitor. So through events, various technologies, we try and understand the different audience tastes there.
As you mentioned, India's got this very long and very rich musical heritage, which means that actually several communities are repositories of musical knowledge. So, that in terms of inclusion and diversity, I suppose over time, these multiple communities, which will also get sort of represented within a musical experience. And so, Ruta, what about you? Changes in audience expectation, and how do we again include the community more, include more voices in the stories that we say, the way we say the content of our stories, because bringing in criticality is very important, right? I mean, otherwise we somewhere we go in a direction and the audience then suddenly switches off, and we know it when it's too late, rather. So how do we do that?
So basically at the museum, what we do is we have ensured since the museum reopened that our labels, our programming is in all 3 basic languages spoken in Mumbai. We would love to do more, but that is challenging. So we right now have Hindi, Marathi, and English. We make sure that we have team that speaks at least 2 of the 3 languages, including our docents, our interns. Not just that, we train our gallery attendants who are on the ground and the first public facing rung of museum staff that people see. So because often what happens in especially the area we are located in, a lot of visitors used to be the fallout of the visitors going to the zoo. These were families who are not necessarily used to a museum going culture, but see, like as I showed you, the building picture is so stunning, people automatically feel like they want to see, like, is it a palace, what is it? They come in. So, and that category of visitors, I have realized through our experience, is they are not comfortable going on a curatorial tour taken by either a docent or a staff member. They feel more comfortable approaching the gallery attendants because of multiple, you can't really pinpoint that, but you have that kind of a more connection in terms of maybe the dialect, the manner of speaking. So you make sure our gallery attendants also trained to take tours if needed of the permanent collection, including our contemporary art exhibitions. So that's one way we make sure that diverse voices will be heard. Our programming ensures we are reaching different socio-economic stratas. Our ticket is just 10 rupees. A lot of our public programming is free. And these are some of the basic things we ensure. On another level, the way, and I'll use the example of our clay model collection to talk about audience expectation and criticality. Now, these clay models were called generic people of India. Now, this was a whole ethnographic colonial project that was done in the 19th century for British in India, where they were documenting people, like they were documenting Indian nature. It was all a great resource meant to be studied, put into categories and taxonomies to better understand how to rule the empire. Now, India is such a diverse country, so they had to understand the different religious beliefs and the different kind of communities, the way people dress, the way people used certain sect marks on their personal body, the way certain people used caps, the way certain people tied their saris or their dhotis. And we have a certain collection of communities on display. Now, a contemporary audience person who is probably obviously not trained in anthropology or understanding colonial history would come and say, my community is not represented here. Why? And this is a common question we get. And that's where we start talking. And most museums internationally who have these kind of clay model collections in the West today do not display them because they are critical and they're stereotyping as well. But we acknowledge that. And because we have a different take coming from Indian context, we chose to put it on display, and we choose to talk about the criticality of why certain people are not documented. What could be the reason? That brings into question who was documenting this, what was the visual genealogy of these kind of art. They're in the end, they're an art form coming from this company miniature style tradition. So we have these very open, very safe conversations where we talk about the representation of diversity and who is not represented. What does that tell you about the intention of this documentation? So in its absence, there is a presence of a point. And we make sure. So we have got lots of petition for people to say our community also should be, you make dolls is what people call them. You make dolls of our community and showcase. And we always try to tell them how this is not within the current scope of the museum. We cannot typecast people today, but we can talk critically about the way this collection, how it was meant to teach Indians of 19th, 20th century to view themselves through a very different divisive lens. At the same time, and because there is such, I mean, this is why I love being in such a diverse area like Mumbai, which was built by immigrants, which was built by such diverse communities. I love this because on weekends at 4 o'clock on Sunday, which is when our upper gallery where this collection is most crowded, we see grandparents bringing their children also talking about this collection now, not through who's represented, who's not, but sari dekho iski. Look at the way caps. My dada used to wear a cap like this. My dada had a walking stick like this. So it's a wonderful also sartorial history. So it's an archive. It's a critical archive. It depends on who your audience is. I will not go into talking about ethnography to maybe somebody who does not interested in that. I will talk about it to especially a Western audience who come on my tours who are just aghast and embarrassed to even look at this collection and want to run away from it, especially if they are themselves from the UK, they want to run away from that now. But these are certain stories in a non-accusatory, in a very conversational fashions. And I think this is where museums play the most important role, is to talk about this in a very sensitive, critical, and comfortable manner. No questions are off the table when our tours happen.
Absolutely. So thanks. You young Turks have been fabulous, but I think there are a few questions. The first, there are several questions. Let me begin. Okay, the first question I think we've already kind of answered. Stories, this is the question from David. Stories usually take a perspective, usually the perspective of the storyteller. Do you ensure that your narratives embrace diversity and capture the Rashomon sort of inclusive perspective? I think we've sort of answered that. The second question is, how can storytelling be used as a tool for curatorial planning, which at some level you have answered, but anyway, I'll read the question. How to curate family archives such that the associated stories can be put forward for public viewing? How to generate citywide interest in family archives? This is from Anjani Trivedi. how to generate citywide interest in family archives located in the same city. So that's I think I'll read a couple of more questions. How can museums focusing on engaging narratives, visitor-centric approaches, and a commitment to continuous improvement? This is from Kritika Matre. How can museums enhance their storytelling capabilities and create impactful and memorable experiences for their visitors? So this is from Kritika, who's from our MOW team. So just any of you can sort of jump in and answer So the first was family archives, and then Kritika says, how can we, make it even better, even more impactful, even more engaging? So just some tips and suggestions. So any of you can jump in. Who wants to start?
Okay, I can just tell about some focusing on engaged narratives, visitor-centric approaches. I can just take the example of the previously concluded birdsong exhibition, where I spoke about how the kids were very thrilled to see and listen to birds. So it got, along with the kids, their parents, their grandparents. So there was a story, a section called the mythological birds, and it was an audio storytelling section there. So it actually enabled the parents and the children to listen to the stories, these mythological birds and their stories. Who was Jatayu? Who was, why did he come? Who was Garuda? So many of them even didn't have an idea about it. So that was when they heard about even the name, the Jatayu was a bird in Indian mythology. That's when immediately the parents started telling them the story. Though it was there in the section to listen to, they immediately jumped in to tell that story. So this is how it actually engaged the family in telling them the stories. Oh, we had learned about this and this is how it was. This was a very beautiful bird. They started explaining with so much expression, and it was lovely to see that actually. Right in the midst of the exhibit, we see them expressing and explaining to their children. So this was a point where we thought, okay, this is something we have done right by just not creating an exhibit where you tell something about birds and music, but you've told something about our mythology, how it can engage a conversation between a busy parent, where in the routine sense they would be definitely busy to even speak to their children sometimes, but some visits like these actually they start expressing themselves better. The children know how to communicate with their parents, so indirectly I think such exhibitions taught them to even communicate with their own parents. What can you ask them freely? How can you talk to them without fear? So I think we have seen a couple of instances where the children are even very scared to talk to a parent or ask them something. But I think it depends where you take them, how long you spend time with them. So these visitor-centric approaches are definitely a challenging point for us when it comes to music. How you can engage a dialogue, how you could create a dialogue also. So we have been trying out various methods to do that, and I think exhibitions play a very important role in that, and curators have a very important role to play in this part, I would say.
Who next would like to answer? If not, I'll go to the next question. So I just want to jump in on this question on the family archives. I think they're tremendously important, and they inform a lot. In Tamil literary terms, you have this concept of the agam and the puram, that is the interior world, the personal space, and the outside world. Definitely one influences the other. And in a family archive, especially if it is it's a big political family or a corporate or legal family, one just gets to see the different streams of influence, knowledge, the intersection of various streams within a family archive. So I think family archives have got tremendous significance, and they teach us about this intersection of the agam and the puram, the inside world and the outside world. We know that one deeply influences the other. So I just wanted to add that regarding the family archive. And we'll just take two more questions. How do we ensure that in our excitement of storytelling, we avoid the obvious temptation to sex it up, to build false narratives, to bend truth to fit the canvas? That's from David. then what is the biggest challenge that you face under the scope of keeping the patrons engaged? Maybe slightly, related questions. Any of you want to answer that?
I mean, here's the thing. The first one, David's question, the urge to sex it up, it might apply to a bigger city where you have a more cosmopolitan audience and all of it. Jaipur, there is no possibility of that happening because that won't attract our audiences. That would rather cause a riot, right? So our problem is the opposite. Our problem is to get them to open their minds. And even in miniatures, you have erotica is a major part of it. But our gallery barely has 3 erotic paintings. There are hundreds of other themes. Majorly, there's religious, royal portraits, courts, all of it. There are even city planning maps, all of it. But in terms of erotic art, no, we can't display it, because the audience is not willing to accept it. And it's not the international audience I'm talking about. They have no problems with it. They might actually enjoy it more. But being in the city, we still have to live in our city. So we actually face the reverse problem, wherein now we are slowly and gradually trying to get our audiences to open up and be more accepting. Right, that there's no need to be so scandalized by everything. Rather, look at it in a more holistic perspective and see what that artwork is trying to talk about. Look at it beyond just something that you find vulgar. Look at the intricacy, the detail, the beauty in it, because everything, you can find beauty in anything, right? So you can find a story in anything. There are phenomenal stories of our Maharaja in the evenings going up to the roof of the Diwane Khas and dancing there with his courtesans. But God forbid we display that painting because that would scandalize our audience. And we're like, it's fine. It's a part of history. You have to learn to accept it over time. So we face the issue the other way around, and more so off late, because we have a very young and dashing Maharaja. The primary focus of our domestic audiences has now shifted from collection to, can we meet the royals? Okay, here's a bit of context. We have this thing wherein at the top of Chandra Mahal, there is a Pachranga flag of Jaipur, and you have a quarter flag that goes up only when Maharaja is in residence. Okay, so that's the thing every guide tells you, because you can see it as soon as you enter that, oh, look, the Maharaja is in residence today. And the only thing they want to see then is, can we go meet him? So for us, now the struggle is more, can you focus on the collection and not the person? And the way to counteract it now is that we have now started using every sort of non-gallery wall space we have to put up these old photographs, starting from Man Singh, going all the way now to Savai Padmanabh Singh, and sort of talking a bit about their life experiences and their life and their likes and dislikes or commonalities these Maharajas shared and all of it, because that has become, of late, with the shift in our audience, the most pressing question we have. Can I meet the princess? Can I meet the Maharaja? Can I go have tea with them? So, I think our audience is a bit different, and they expect something very different out of coming to a royal palace, especially when you tell them, oh, the Maharaja actually lives in it, And since, especially given that when he is out and he's doing gallery rounds or something, he's actually very open to going up and, letting people take photos with him and all of that. And that has sort of prompted us to address it in a very quick way. We would have liked to have thought about it better and maybe done something more nuanced or more critical, as we were talking about. But given the budget and the time we were allotted, I thought that photographs with good captions seemed to be the only way, because otherwise there's no way this gets done in a week. Yeah. Right? So there is that. And then one last thing I'll say is, anything like, you're trying to, your challenges you face, or, any temptation you have, all of it, a lot of it gets controlled by who is the person signing the checks, right? For us, we are very much privately owned. There might be a trust, but the family has a very, very strong hold on everything that happens, right? Even if we print out new stationery, it needs written approval from them. So it's very much for us, anything we do, any new thing we want to do to, up visitor engagement or any of that sort, it first has to go through like 3 channels in which we convince the board before we can actually even begin to work. right? So it's very different from a conventional museum where you have management which is trained in running museums, which understands what cultural tourism is, or which sort of knows how to manage these sort of various cultural entities altogether. For us, that doesn't exist, right? For us, it is whatever the family wishes to do today. They up and they call and they're like, okay, this is what's happening today. And then the entire team has to reorganize immediately and make sure that our work does not suffer, but their task also gets done, if that makes sense. So that kind of keeps all temptations away because we don't have the time or the mind space, the energy or the budget for it.
So thanks. There's a question from Reshma on curators. And if you don't mind, I can request Reshma to then get in touch with us and I could share your email ID. She wants to know about curation. So that's a kind of a different topic. So thanks. It was wonderful. I just want to end on this lovely episode that happened when we all met in Bombay at the CSMVS meet. Miss Shobita Punja had this lovely statue of Buddha and she showed it to all of us. And she says, if there were a bunch of students, what would what would they notice? And we all said, either Gandhara or Taxila or Buddhism or a particular pose. And then she said, she took that statue and she showed us and said, I will teach the child non-violence. So I think it was a fabulous sort of explanation of the power of storytelling and what, layers that it can open up with just one statue, So I want to thank you all. I want to thank all our viewers who've been very, very patient and have stayed with us because we've gone to almost an hour and 40 minutes. So thank you, Ruta, Kritika, and Aarti. And we'll stay in touch. And thanks for taking the time and sharing your experiences with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.